Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I'm Lee Sacket, the person behind the name, I guess. And I'm just going to go through a few things today, kind of an introduction about myself and who I am and who Lee J. Sacket Incorporated has become, and then spend a lot of time on our restoration process just to kind of walk you through that. It's something that we use, and we've come up with ways of doing a repeatable restoration process to help both us internally do a consistently dependable process, but also something that if you're working on something for yourself, you can use as an outline for how you might try to tackle your own restoration project. So throughout, I've got a few pictures of different projects we've done and stuff too. So just real quick, this was one of the loads we took to the Minnesota State Fair a couple years ago. There's a Gilson Pacer lawn tractor up on the front of the trailer, and then a John Deere 320 utility, IH Titan, and then a John Deere BR Lindemann crawler, and a Super C Farmall on the back. So we try to do a little bit of everything. It's sort of whatever comes in the door. We've got a antique Coke machine we're working on from the 50s right now at the shop, and some cars and a ton of tractors, and just a little bit of everything. Always some variety, which is really fun. So a little bit about me. I have a bachelor's of industrial engineering from the University of Minnesota Duluth, and then I also minored in music, and I continue to do that it's not a side job. I do get a little bit of money from our local school district to help with their percussion program and marching band and stuff, and actually missing a performance tomorrow night that my wife has to drive our other big truck and haul percussion equipment up to a performance for our winter percussion group. So she won't probably ever hear this, but thanks, Shannon, for covering for me while I'm down here. So my first job out of college was at the Case IH plant up in Fargo, like Dan said, the old Steiger plant. And that's really where I cut my teeth in the world of manufacturing. Raw steel comes into one end of that building, and tractors and wheel loaders come out the other end. It's amazing. Just a humongous facility with all kinds of different manufacturing processes going on. And I was part of the Case production system that was modeled after the Toyota production system, basically just-in-time manufacturing and work cells. And our group was charged with going into work areas and basically saying, what can we do to make your job easier? And we would create tooling and fixtures and redo kind of the layout and process flow through work cells and stuff like that. So we did some work in welding cells. We did a whole bunch of studying and modeling of the paint system to increase the throughput for that, and just a whole bunch of different assembly areas and stuff like that. So I really got to understand how you build a tractor on a major scale, in a factory that does, obviously world-class work. So and also, of course, most of those guys have old tractors, so I started to really get into old tractors. I actually grew up in the city, but I have a lot of farming relatives in Iowa that I enjoyed spending a lot of time in the summers on their farms and stuff. So, and just always was fascinated with anything that moved. So cars and trucks and tractors and construction equipment and all that stuff was just where I wanted to be from a very young age. So. A whole bunch of people moved from Case IH to SPX Robinair throughout the world, including like all the way from the CEO of Case IH. And I was recruited to go down and start a continuous improvement team in Northwest Ohio, and at SPX Robinair. So Robinair makes refrigeration service equipment. So there's a good chance that if you've ever had your car's air conditioning worked on, that there was a Robinair unit used for that. So ultimately I ended up being the production manager at that facility. So again, just really got into production processes and sort of how to run a business and that kind of thing. The only trouble with being there was that we were from Minnesota. We got married while I was down there. So my wife and I actually were in a long-distance relationship for 5 years before we got married. She was at the U of M Twin Cities. Well, she was a senior in high school when we started dating, and I was in college in Duluth. Then she was in Minneapolis, and I was in Duluth. Then I moved to Fargo, and she was still in Minneapolis. Then I moved to Ohio, and she was still in Minneapolis, and we got married, and then she moved down there. But she was still getting her master's degree in St. Paul, Minnesota, so we had to drive home every other weekend for her to go to class. So that got old fast, and so we ended up looking for a different place, and I ended up taking a job in Owatonna, Minnesota, and then we moved to Ellendale in the year 2000. And really the week before we moved in, I went and found a Farm All H and bought it and hauled it to our soon-to-be property, and that was my first tractor. So my plan was I was going to put a push blade on the front to move snow, and actually did that. Like the first thing I did before we even were working in the house was I was in the shop hooking up my milling machine so that I could drill all the holes and make this bracket because we had snow coming. So anyway, after the 9/11 attacks happened in 2001, it was February 12th of 2002, so we're coming up on a big anniversary for me where I was let go, but I was actually really excited about it. I felt like it wasn't a good fit, but I was in the right place geographically, and we really loved where we lived. So I went out and bought another tractor, another Farm All H, actually, and restored it with the idea that I'll sell that to help prolong my job search and just kind of give me more time so I can pick the right place to go. And two people saw that tractor at the LeSueur swap meet in 2002 in the spring and asked me to restore their tractors for them. So the second one was an Alice B and the third was a John Deere 60, or maybe it was the other way around. It was the same day. But anyway, so that's how my logo came to be. We ended up with 3 different colored tractors as the first three tractors that I restored. So I guess we were unofficially founded in 2002. I still thought that this was just a transitional thing that I was going to do as a hobby while I looked for a new job. But as it turned out, we ended up with more work coming in as we went, and I was able to keep things going. And instead of looking for a new job, I eventually started looking for employees, and we started hiring some people to help out. My wife was really my first employee. She helped a lot, and my father-in-law helped a lot. He actually loaned me his paint gun that he had from, I don't know, in the 70s when he painted a couple of cars, and that was my first paint gun. So low budget stuff, but I figured out how to spray paint with it, and it worked out pretty well. So in 2005, we built a new shop at our home place. The old building was just an old hog building, and I couldn't even finish some of the restorations in that building because the door was too small. So I'd have to go out to the cold shed in the middle of winter and finish putting stuff together. But we kept doing it, and the quality was good, and people kept asking us to do more. So then we built a bigger building at our home place, and then I had a display at the Minnesota State Fair in 2006, and a guy walked by and said, "Hey, are you interested in all the tools and equipment and manuals and everything out of an old IH dealership?" And I went, "Yeah, like who wouldn't?" And it turned out that the place was only 20 miles from my house. So I said, "What are you going to do with your building?" And he said, "I guess it's for sale." So we ended up moving in over there and moving the operation. So we continued to do all the body and paint work of all the sheet metal and stuff at my home place, but then started doing all the mechanical work and disassembly and reassembly in this old IH dealership. And so fast forward, we've completed 600 or 700 tractors and cars and stuff now. I don't actually know exactly, so one of the summer jobs for my daughters is going to be to actually figure out exactly what number we're on, because that's important. I have 10 years worth of photographs of everything, but after that it just kind of got away from me, and I still have like 50,000 pictures of restorations that I need to go through and actually figure out what was done when and that kind of stuff. But over those years, we've gotten to do some really cool projects for John Deere and Hagie Sprayers and Toro and Donaldson and the Moline and Graco are some of the corporate clients. And then just a ton of people that either are collectors or have grandpa's first tractor that we've restored for them to preserve family history or that kind of thing. So we have 18 employees now. It fluctuates a little bit, and we'll have more this summer. And I would certainly hire 2 more if I can find the right people. And our parts department has grown significantly. We have over 10,000 items listed on eBay now, and we're in the process of developing our own e-commerce site. So we're a dealer for Steiner. We sell a ton of their stuff, but we also sell from all sorts of different places. And the dealership building that we're in actually had a whole bunch of new old stock stuff in it when we got in there. So we've used a bunch of it, but we've also sold stuff. And I bought a small 3D laser, so we're cutting our own gaskets now and felts and stuff for obsolete parts. And even sometimes if it's something that we can order and get it in 2 days, if I can crank it out overnight, then I'll do that. And we have a 3D printer for plastic. We make a few plastic parts and stuff like that too, and casting molds and stuff. So we're always adding to our technology because it's getting harder and harder to find some things. So we're figuring, okay, well, I don't want to retire from, or I want to retire from this someday. I don't want to have to do something else. So we have to find ways to be innovative and continue to support the hobby as a whole. So the parts business is a big part of that for us. So our company is based on core values, and these don't necessarily apply to tractors. They kind of apply to everything, but what it really comes down to is people. And there's a lot of that going on here. You know, it's not a huge group of folks that are at this show, but the quality of conversations that we're having with all of you guys, and I hear and overhear things, is amazing. And that really is what our business is all about too. It's about the relationships and people, and both our employees and our customers are evaluated based on our core values. So we may choose to not even take on a job if somebody doesn't fit with what we have here. And it's simple stuff: honesty, quality driven, consistently dependable, innovative and motivated, and collaborative, helpful, and humble. And our employee evaluations, when we do them, are based on these first, and then how they're actually performing on the job. Because if a person comes in and has all of these characteristics, usually we can find a place for them that will be productive within our organization. So that's kind of the basis of how we run things. And then I'll jump a little bit ahead. I kind of talked about the parts department. We have a guy that all he does is buy parts for the restorations that are going on or service jobs that are going on in the shop, and then a group of people that are doing the online sales and taking orders over the phone and that kind of thing. The picture here is of the old parts bins. Like, our building is a step back in time. So these are the old IH dealership parts bins, and we have rows of them full of stuff. Which is really fun. It's also really organized, so that helps a lot. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk more about our restoration process. So there's a list of categories, and what we do is we'll start out with an evaluation and basically go through all the rest of these items on the list and come up with our ideas about what needs to be done to a project in order to do that stuff. So I'll get a little more detailed about that, but it's an inspection, and then we get that estimate put together and talk with our customer about, here's what we came up with, and here's what we think needs to happen, and here's what we'd like to do, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we kind of go through the financial part of that too with the customer and decide whether that makes sense from a budget standpoint, or if there are things that fit or don't with what their expectation is of the finished product. I always say that we need to preserve our reputation by not cutting too many corners out of stuff, but there still is wiggle room within every project. For example, one of the biggest ways to save money is the 3 tractors that I brought here are painted with IH2150 red with hardener in it. It may be $100 a gallon, and the hardener is expensive, but if we mix it in our Martin Senior mixing bank, it's almost $2,000 a gallon for that same paint. So you do get a better product, but I can save $4,000 or $5,000 on a restoration by using Martin Senior or not using the Martin Senior paint. We are fortunate as IH collectors that we still can go to a dealer and get a quality paint that's the right color. The Alice Chalmers folks don't have that opportunity, so we're kind of stuck mixing what we mix in our mixing bank, and some of the industrial colors and stuff like that. And a lot of the other brands, we end up where we don't have that option. But with the IH tractors, and red is about the most expensive paint to mix, so some of the other stuff that we mix isn't nearly as expensive. But just a side note about that. So, but we do put hardener in the 2150 to modify it and make it shine more. So then I'll go a little bit in detail. Here's a 460 utility that actually that tractor now, the chassis is painted, the engine's been overhauled, and it's all going back together. So I apologize for the lights. So the inspection, big part of it is photographs, and throughout the entire process, we take tons of pictures, hopefully a few hundred of every project that we do. There's a bunch of different reasons, but the biggest one is just self-serving, because when I'm going back together with a tractor after it's been apart for weeks or months, which way does that bracket go again? And a lot of times you can look in a parts book and see an exploded parts view and find out pretty much what's supposed to happen. If you have a picture of it before you took it off, somewhere in that bank of all the pictures that we have a way to see that and go, oh yeah, that's how it was. And so that's a huge help. But it also is a way for us to remember whether stuff has been on or off the tractor, or what it looked like before, or whatever. So that's a big part of the inspection. And then we do go through our evaluation sheet, note all the repairs that we want to do, create an initial parts list so that the parts department can go through and put prices together for how much we think we're going to need to spend on parts. We use our dynamometer and steam cleaner. We'll steam clean the tractor first and then run it on the dyno if it's a running machine and if the PTO works. And that allows us, if you get the tractor hot, and just like Raleigh was saying when he was giving his presentation about testing a hydro, you need things to be warmed up and working the way they're supposed to. Most of the leaks will show their ugly heads when you have a warm tractor under load on a dyno. Coolant leaks and stuff like that all pretty much magically appear when you're actually putting something to work, and you can get a good idea of areas that are going to need to be addressed before we start doing cosmetic work on a project. So, and of course the dyno will tell you how much horsepower it's making and whether the governor is working properly when you put it under load and that kind of stuff. So we do a lot of evaluation that way. Last winter I actually bought another dyno, so now we have one that'll go 200 horsepower. Our other one will go to 100. So as the tractors are getting bigger and we're working on newer stuff, we have to take that into consideration also. So the body shop inspects all the sheet metal and all the parts that they're going to touch, and we do an evaluation of whether something is going to need to be replaced or whether it can be fixed. We can fix just about anything, but it's kind of more a matter of, okay, well, how long is that going to take versus if I can buy one for $300 or something like that. And a lot of times it makes more sense to buy the replacement part. And we also have to acknowledge that sometimes the new part isn't exactly going to fit perfectly and stuff, so we have to put in a little bit of time to make sure that it fits right, or if we have to make adjustments and stuff, we'll do that. But it's still a lot of times less expensive to put a new part on. So then the engine, we remove and label everything so that with our shop, I mean, we have, I don't know, probably 70 open work orders right now. So there are different projects in different states of repair going on at any given time. So everything has to be organized and labeled in order for us to get through and not misplace things or get things painted the wrong color. We have the ability to rebuild starters and generators in-house, but we have a person that's very close by that's all they do. So they'll turn stuff around in a day or two for us, so we still utilize them, and they actually are doing it a little bit cheaper than it would cost us to do it, so we focus on the other things that we do. Magnetos and distributors we rebuild in-house. That was a deal where we were sending stuff out and it was taking 6 to 8 weeks sometimes or longer to get stuff back. Carburetors too. So we started doing all that in-house. Water pumps, we almost replace every single water pump that we ever pull off. I bet out of the first 10 tractors that I restored, I replaced 4 and then ended up having to replace 5 of the other 6 right after I put the tractor back together. Like, I don't know what the deal is, but they just love to leak after you clean all the goop and crap out of them and stuff. So now we pretty much replace all the water pumps or have them rebuilt. So here's a picture that's that 460 utility again. We had to be home wreckers and do some evictions. You can see in the exhaust ports that the mice got in there and made apartments. So it was really ugly. That back, second to the rear, second to the front. They just pack that full of stuff. And we find a lot of mouse nests, mostly in bell housings, but if something's been sitting for a long time, you get into that, and then it gets down into the cylinders, and this engine was stuck. So we had to do a full overhaul, and here it is with new pistons and sleeves in it, coming back together. So that's kind of part of the fun of having pictures too, the before and after, because you go, well, geez, you got all this time in the thing, and you go, well, yeah, that's what it looks like now, but remember this? So and it's good for us too, for morale too, to just see that progress as it goes. So then we go into powertrain and transmission. Same kind of thing, just going through, making sure that everything is, there's not a bunch of junk down in the bottom of a transmission. It shifts, works in all the gears. If we're changing the transmission top gasket, of course, that allows us to look in there and make sure there isn't anything strange and out of the ordinary. We'll actually put a pry bar on counter shafts and stuff and push on them to see if anything's loose. And a lot of times there is something else wrong. A lot of times you go to fix a leaking seal on an axle, and then you find out, oh, well, it's because the bearing went bad, and that bearing got so bad that it wore a groove in the axle, and it can definitely kind of get bigger. So we have a change order process for our customers if we run into that stuff. It's all based on an estimate of what we know at the time that we write it. So if you get in there and find more information, instead of having a big surprise and having to beg for forgiveness at the end of a project, we let them know as we go and come up with that and let them be part of the decision-making process about how to handle those issues as they arise. So fuel system, I guess an interesting part about that to note is that we've started to do electrolysis on the inside of fuel tanks. And so that's an electrical process where we're putting DC current through an anode, and the tank is grounded. And basically what happens is the rust comes off of the inside of the tank and attaches itself to this anode that's coming down in through the top of the tank. We use a soda water solution to help facilitate that process. But then we can get tanks really clean and then put a liner inside, like a liquid vinyl kind of liner stuff that seals those up. We used to send tanks out, and that too was a lengthy process where we'd have to wait for something to come back. And as a production guy, the worst thing I want to do is have something sitting there not having something done to it. So we've brought that in-house so that we can control that process and move it through quicker. So, and carburetors almost all get rebuilt. We have a couple different diesel fuel system places depending on what it is that we'll send stuff out to. There are still people out there that are set up with all the right equipment for calibrating and stuff, so we let them do that. We have some calibration equipment at the shop, but it's not currently something that any of our employees really have a passion about, so I'm happy to send that out and let somebody else do it. Here's some bowl gears, just the inside of a transmission or rear end. Electrical system, I already mentioned the charging system gets sent out, but it just includes battery, wiring harness, charging system, lights. We put new wiring harnesses in almost every tractor that we do. Most of them we can buy, and there are some super high quality stuff out there. Steiner sells a really nice wiring harness, and so we use a lot of theirs. And that's what's on the tractors that I have outside. So you can see the quality of what's there. It's really great. And it's easy because they come with instructions on how everything's supposed to hook up, and so it makes it really nice. Cooling system, I cautioned everybody yesterday, a lot of times new radiators aren't exactly the same dimensions as the originals, so keep an eye on that and keep that in mind. We do send radiators out for testing and cleaning, but a lot of times it's easier to put a new radiator on. A radiator guy that used to test stuff for us before he retired said, yeah, I can make sure that this thing's gonna be good today, but I can't tell you how thin something is that might start leaking tomorrow or a week from now or whatever. So he kind of pushed us into the mindset of maybe it's better to replace the radiator, but always test fit it before you finish putting your tractor together, because we do run into times where there's fins that are sticking out or seams from where the top tank's been soldered on. Or wheels and tires is another category. We drain all the fluid out. I hate fluid. I said yesterday it's like trying to deliver a calf, trying to get a half-soaked tube out of a tire, and I've just always hated that process. And if you've ever done it, you probably understand why I say that. It's just not fun. It is faster for us to dismount and remount a set of tires than to mask them off properly to blast and paint, and we can get the inside of the rim blasted and painted too, so you get all that rust out of the inside. So we always tear them down, almost always. So if somebody's going to bring us a tractor and they go, oh, I'm going to put new tires on it first, I say, no, just send the new tires along. We'll change them out, because otherwise you're paying somebody else to do it, but we're going to do it too. So there are times too where new rims are less expensive. If you can get a rim that's powder coated the color that you want it to be, silver in our case most of the time here, it may be less expensive if you've got valve stem repair issues and stuff like that to just buy a new rim and go the whole works. So that's something to think about. And we just do that. We're constantly looking at what the most efficient way to do this is, because our restorations are really expensive. So we are trying to save money and find better ways to do things all the time. We don't like charging so much. I hate the money part of our business. I wish I could do it for free, but we are making a living at this too. So anyway, we always have to have a conversation about wheel spacing. Where do you want this thing to end up when we're done? Is it the same as what you brought, or are you setting it up for a certain row width or whatever? Because that affects, once we blast and paint the chassis, where we set those centers is going to be where we'd like them to stay, because once you start adjusting after you have black paint on axles or whatever, it's going to start scratching stuff. So steering, I don't have a lot to say about that. On a W4 International, you've got 6 different joints in the process to get all the way out to the wheels. So a tiny little bit here and a tiny little bit here can end up being a half a turn on the steering wheel before anything happens. So we do look at all of those places, U-joints and connections, and of course the worm and sector gear, but also the bushing down in the bottom and all that stuff to try to make sure that's as tight as possible. And there's just different parts all the way throughout that to keep an eye on. But it's not always as easy as just fixing one little thing, because there are so many connections in some of those systems. Brakes, we pretty much put new brakes on everything. It's one of those things that's really a safety thing, if nothing else, to at least pull it apart and inspect what's going on. A lot of those pinion shaft seals are leaking and stuff, so then you got brakes that are soaked in oil that don't work very well, or the newer tractors like the Hydro 86 we have outside, or even like Super M's and stuff like that have the disc brakes with the little balls that fit inside. You got to make sure those grooves are super smooth so that there's nothing to catch on when you're working on that. And there's just little things, but it's all those detail things that will make a project much more successful and much more enjoyable in the end. We talk a lot about with our customers about, well, what are you going to do with this thing? And they say, oh, well, it's never going to do anything. I just want to run it in some praise. We don't need to worry about this and we don't need to worry about that. The thing is, if that starts to bother you, you're going to be less likely to take that tractor out and do something with it. So if you don't fix that stuff right and have it so where it's a consistently dependable machine, it's probably going to sit. And then the work that you've done on it is going to start to deteriorate. The worst thing that we can do to our old tractors is have them just sit around. So we need to run them and drive them and do things with them. The old adage of, oh, it ran when I parked it. Well, 20 years ago, it probably did run good. But if it sits that long, it's probably not going to run that good now. So get your stuff running. Take it out, play with it, and do what you can during a restoration to make sure that it will be easy for you to do that. So then we're getting into more of the metalwork stuff. Is more of a cosmetic thing, not necessarily though. So I'm talking about rebuilding, like maybe boring out and putting bushings in clutch pedals and stuff like that, or patching sheet metal and stuff like that too. So there's metal work that happens kind of throughout. A lot of the stuff, like I just said, or we've got a WD9 at the shop right now. Those are unique because the pedals are actually kind of a two-piece pressed steel thing. It's a stamped thing that's then welded together, and we got this tractor in, and it hadn't run in years, so we got it running and finally got to where we could drive the thing and noticed that the clutch pedal went way off to the side when you pushed on it. And you look underneath, and it's actually quite thin, and it had a big crack in it, so we had to pull that apart and weld it back together and put some bushings in. And we were that far, so we pulled the shaft out and put seals in where the shaft goes. And there's a lot of that scope creep kind of stuff that happens along the way. And anybody that's worked on something probably knows what I'm talking about with that. Hydraulics, we look at the hydraulic system too, and just kind of do what needs to be done to fix that stuff. And then we have an other repairs category. Maybe on a cab tractor, there's something that's unique, like a air conditioning system probably would go into other repairs because I don't have an AC or whatever category. So we kind of have to have a catch-all for some of that stuff. So that's the mechanical section. That's all the stuff that we do mechanically to a project. And then we start disassembling and preparing for sandblasting. We sandblast everything that we paint. Pretty much, I would say 95 to 98% gets sandblasted or bead blasted. I always tell people, I can guarantee that I can get paint to stick to whatever you have on your tractor, but I can't guarantee that whatever is already on there is going to stay stuck underneath to whatever's under there. So if I'm starting with bare metal, I know that this is going to be on there pretty much forever. So that's why we kind of really push to do sandblasting on things. We have to take all kinds of care to make sure that we keep sand out of the inner workings of a project, so whatever it is. So we use tape and twine and rope and metal cover plates, and that window rope caulk, that putty stuff, works great around like PTO seals and axle seals and stuff like that. You can pack that in there. And we have there's a guy right across the street from our shop that does industrial sandblasting. So he's been kind of in on our program for a long time, and we set stuff on a rack And literally is about this high, so it's way up in the air so he can get the underside of everything. But he knows what to look for too. So if you're going to have somebody do blasting for you, take 10 minutes to go around the thing and say, don't hit this, here's where the serial number tag is, it's taped off, don't knock that tape off, and here's where the sensitive holes are, and here, this is rope cock, we want this to stay on here. And if you walk them around, usually those guys are pretty good, and our guy's great. He's been doing it a long time, and he's been doing it a long time for us, so he kind of knows what to stay away from. And if something looks weird, he'll come across the street and say, hey, I noticed this thing. And so having a relationship with a person, if you're having somebody do that for you, is super important. If you're doing it yourself, just don't be in a hurry. Stand back and don't just go crazy on stuff, and it will be successful. It's coal slag. It's called black, I don't know what it's called now, black diamond or that type of stuff, but it's a darker black kind of a material that we use. It's not a silica based product. It really is the slag that comes out of coal-fired power plants. They process it into grits. And actually, it's the same stuff that goes on asphalt shingles. The grit that's on those is basically similar to what we use. We also have a cabinet that has glass bead in it. So we use that for any brass or things that we want to be more gentle with, that we don't want to put a profile into. And we do blast all the small stuff at our shop, and then just the big things like wheel castings and the whole chassis or whatever will go across the street. Just because he can do it faster than we can. So we've noticed, it says don't use Sharpie directly on parts. I have had Sharpie show through 2150 red, even though we've wiped it off with lacquer thinner and it doesn't exist at all. Like, for some reason, whatever chemicals are in that permanent marker, it really is permanent. So we actually will label stuff, but we'll write it on tape, on the roll of tape, then peel the tape off and stick it on something. Just to try to keep that contaminant away. It's weird. I can't explain it. But that's just something that we've learned. So I kind of talked about sandblasting, and we're starting to get short on time, so I'm going to kind of jump past that. We do have a system of kind of checking each other with everything that we do, body work or sandblasting or whatever. When we say something's ready to be sandblasted, we'll grab somebody else and say, hey, take a look at this, just make sure I didn't miss something, and kind of keep each other that way. Because we do have a tendency as humans, I think, we see something so many times we start to not see it anymore, and we're on to something else. And even though it might be right in front of our face, we're looking over here and we're just used to seeing something. So having a second set of eyes is really beneficial. Body work, we take great care to take out dents. It's not a matter of just filling dents full of stuff and sanding it till it's smooth and that's it. We do a bunch of dent removal processes, either with heat or cooling or even cutting sections out that are rusted and welding in sections. There was a time where you couldn't get Ford hoods and fenders with the Ford stamped in the side of it, so we would cut that part out of an old hood that was rusted out and then cut a hole and weld in that section into a new one to make stuff look right. And that's a big part of what our bodywork process is. We don't want that stuff to crack in 20 years and create problems for somebody. So you just can't have a thick amount of that stuff in there. So it really ends up being just a skim coat to cover up hammer marks, and that kind of thing is about all. But we'll have a pile of dust on the floor when we're done because you put a big blob on and you sand almost all of it off to make sure that it actually lays down the way you want it to. But that's kind of how that works. I think I talked about most of this. A lot of times it's a 2-step or 3-step process. So we'll do body filler, sand it out, then we use a high build primer that goes on thick, high build, and then we block that out. And usually, I'd say half the time, we can actually block it out and get it smooth just with one coat. But if we block that out and we can still sense some imperfection, then we'll go back and prime it again and then sand it again before we're ready for painting. And once in a while it's a little longer than that. We use a sealer kind of as the first coat of paint. You put it on and wait 30 minutes or so, and then go right over the top of that with color. And that sealer is an adhesion promoter to help between the primer that's on it and then the paint that goes on top of it. So it's another little step, but it's kind of insurance that this is something that's going to be legacy quality or heirloom quality. I always say you only want to do this once, and it's enough work to do it once, and it costs enough to let's just make sure we do it right the first time. We do get tractors in that have been restored before other places or by an individual or whatever, that paint's starting to fall off or didn't get all the leaks or whatever, and we kind of have to start over when it comes to that. So before we paint, if it's been sandblasted and there's tape on stuff, we'll actually peel all that off and clean everything, just blow it off mostly, and then put fresh tape on. So this is a carburetor that all the brass stuff has been covered up with just tape and then cut out, just to keep, not only does it looks nicer to have those little details of some yellow metal on stuff, but we're also, the surfaces that we want to not have paint on, like gasket surfaces and stuff like that, we put just a thin coat of tape on and then cut around it, so we don't have to do as much sanding afterwards. There was a time where I wasn't doing as much of this, and I found I was spending a few hours just cleaning stuff up after the paint was on it so that I could get a shaft to go through a hole smoothly and stuff like that. So we've kind of evolved into doing a little better than that. Talked about priming and painting. Really all the hardware is painted individually. So we have these zigzag racks that are about this long. It's just basically 16 gauge wire or whatever that just is in that shape, and we hang a bunch of those, and all the nuts and washers and stuff for a tractor end up going on there, and we paint all of it individually so that we know that the back sides of everything are well coated, so that when your tractor gets rained on at the show, the water doesn't get in there and then cause rust to creep out from behind something. So it does mean that we have to go over everything with a touch-up brush afterwards and just touch those spots where my wrenches have screwed up the bolt heads or something like that, but that's kind of how that works. We do a lot of axles in black. Depending on the year of manufacture, a lot of that stuff just got all painted when it was coming down the line and they didn't care. But we like to do that black as an added touch so that if you do adjust stuff, it doesn't create as much of a scratch. So you can see in this picture, we've painted the axles black and then wrapped them in paper so that we could paint the red, and then when you peel that off, you have a nice contrast of black and red. The PTO on this one did not get masked. Sometimes the customer will have us do the PTO shaft in black also, although I think most of them probably were red. But again, it depends on when stuff was built. But this is a good example. This photo is kind of how we like to paint a chassis. There really isn't anything here that we can't get a good shot at with a paint gun to get a good coat of paint on it. So that's kind of the goal. It doesn't always work out financially for somebody to have us take something down this far. So there are times where we might leave the frame rails and front bolster and stuff on a project, on a tractor, or even more of it. But that's part of that wiggle room that I was talking about in terms of kind of how projects go. So then the body work all gets done too. And then touch-up painting gets done, and then final assembly. So I kind of talked about that too. This picture is my middle daughter who's taking her driver's test on Monday. We'll have another driver in the family, which is good. We were at the Iowa State Fair with the H that's across the parking lot. We actually assembled that tractor at the Iowa State Fair, and Steiner helped us out with some parts. And we did that kind of as a demonstration over the course of the Iowa State Fair a couple years ago. And really, my three daughters assembled that tractor. We had the parts book, and they looked and found the right bolts to go in and made sure everything was right. And we put that tractor together, and I drove it out of the building when we were done at the fair. So that was pretty cool. And it was fun for the general public to see these kids working on this tractor, putting it together and stuff too, and a great experience for them. So, probably, hopefully inspiring other kids that, hey, we can do this, because that's a big thing, right? I mean, we haven't seen many children around this place this weekend, so we need to kind of keep encouraging that to happen. We do have a warranty section within our paperwork, I guess. It's all non-billable stuff that happens, so we charge you to do it once, and if we get it wrong the first time, we do it again and again and again until it's right. But you don't get charged for that, but we do document that so that we know what it took to get something done, mostly on our end of things, but it just keeps from a black hole of lost time happening. So that's kind of what that is. And then that's about it. There's two of my daughters at Bird City. Our tractor that they're sitting on is a WF Hebert A14V shop mule prototype. It's the only one known to exist with H sheet metal on it. The rest of them had a plate steel front. And then this is either an A14 or A21, I don't remember. That has a U2 power unit, so it's kind of like a Farmall A standard, if you want to call it that. But Hebert made those, and there just happened to be another one at Bird City, so we thought that was pretty cool to take a picture of a couple of the Hebert shop mules together. So we got a couple minutes till the next presentation. If you guys have a few questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll be next door, and I'll be around tomorrow too. So yeah.
Could you go back a few slides to that last cross-step slide before that one right there? Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, a couple of the tips on assembly too. We kind of have a rule about never placing any of our tools on painted surfaces. Try not to put any of the parts on the ground or anywhere dirty. A lot of times when we're first moving tractors around, we'll take our shoes off before we drive them, because I don't want to be the first person to put a scratch in something. And then there's a lot of testing and adjusting. Like I mentioned about radiators, everything's been apart. So linkages aren't probably going to go back together exactly the same way. And some of that stuff's really sensitive, throttle linkage and stuff like that, where you have a lot of adjusting to do and timing the first time you start the tractor up again and stuff like that. So there's a lot of time that goes into that assembly process. It seems like, oh, it's all painted and done, it'll just go right back together, but we end up spending a lot more time than we usually think it'll take. So any other questions or anything? Yes?
So when it comes to sandblasting, what is the majority of the parts that needs to be removed for sandblasting?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the whole.
So for sandblasting, what's the majority of the parts that needs to be removed for sandblasting?
So it sort of depends on what the machine is. In a lot of cases, it's almost easier to sandblast a tractor that's more together, because then things are naturally held together, you know, and sealed out, just as they naturally were built to seal out stuff. We have a couple different ways to overcome that. We use a plasma cutter all the time to trace gaskets onto steel and then cut plates, and we keep those. So for a Farmall H, I've got a manifold cover plate that I use every time we do an H Farmall or an M or whatever, and so we make a lot of cover plates like that to protect that stuff. We pretty much ceramic coat every exhaust system that we do. I guess that really wasn't in here, but we started spraying that stuff in-house too, so then you don't have stuff rusting over time after it gets hot. So that, since that's a different color, then we have the manifold off, so then we put those cover plates on and stuff. So it really is a matter of kind of a balance between how far you want to go and how many shadows you're okay with, where there's kind of light paint behind things and stuff like that. But and if it's something that you don't want to get hit with an industrial sandblaster, but you're comfortable doing it in a cabinet or something like that, then obviously that would be something to take off. Anything else? I probably need to get out of the way for the next one, so I think Howard's up, and is that right? Is Howard next? So you guys have got to stay for Howard's presentation. I was here yesterday for that, and the amount of work that he's done to tell you about what he's going to tell you about is just unbelievable. So please stay for that. It's fantastic. And
And all of our presenters are fantastic. Thank you, Lee, so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's just simply say thanks.
thanks.